So here's an interesting one. I was having a conversation with someone who recently cut out caffeine and they realized that they gained a little bit of weight. They hadn't really changed their diet or exercise, so we presumed that this was water weight. And after a few days they returned to their normal body weight, so we definitely could presume that it was water weight. So what does caffeine have to do with water retention? Many people will tell you that caffeine is a diuretic, but I think the better way to phrase this is that adenosine is an anti-diuretic. And that might sound confusing, but let me explain. Caffeine is referred to as an adenosine antagonist. And all this really means is that when caffeine is present inside of our system, it will bind to adenosine receptors. But when caffeine is sitting inside of the adenosine receptor, nothing actually happens. But it does inhibit the actual adenosine molecules from binding to the receptor. So caffeine simply disrupts the signaling of adenosine on its target cell. And most people know adenosine for its ability to increase what's referred to as sleep pressure, or simply just the drive to go to bed. But what most people don't actually know is that we have adenosine receptors all around the body. This includes the kidney, liver, heart, and pancreas. But if we're talking about water retention, we're going to be specifically focused on the kidney. Through a myriad of different mechanisms, adenosine causes the kidneys not to excrete sodium. And when we excrete sodium, we'll also excrete water. But when we have very high amounts of adenosine, we'll actually be reabsorbing both water and sodium. And this is the anti-diuretic effect of adenosine. Now when we drink caffeine, the reason it causes us to increase urine output is simply by blocking this mechanism, meaning we'll lose more salt and fluid in the urine. But why would someone who's been drinking caffeine for a long period of time have a much more magnified water retention when they stop caffeine? And this is simply because we become extremely adenosine sensitive when we drink a lot of caffeine. And this is how we actually decrease our caffeine sensitivity, which is why after you've had 200 milligrams of caffeine every day for a few months, you need a little bit more to feel its effects. And this is by increasing the amount of adenosine receptors all throughout the body. So when you cut out caffeine cold turkey, you're in a state where you're extremely adenosine sensitive. And you no longer have caffeine in the mix blocking adenosine from getting to the receptors. Simply put, the same amount of adenosine in someone who's been drinking caffeine for a long period of time is simply going to have much more pronounced effects than it would in someone who's never had caffeine. And once again, this is due to the number of adenosine receptors throughout the entire body. So let's say you go a day where you don't have your caffeine, and you realize the next day that you've gained a few pounds of body weight. The first thing is that you don't have to be scared because it's likely just water weight. But if this does occur to a substantial degree, it's a signal that your body is making adaptations to try and find normal homeostasis in the presence of caffeine, which means you may have already or may in the near future develop a dependence on caffeine rather than using caffeine as a tool. And once again, this is because when you don't have caffeine in your system, you are much more adenosine sensitive than most other individuals. And maybe the only way that you can feel any sort of energy is when you have caffeine, and this is referred to as a caffeine dependence. But luckily, there's a really simple fix. You simply just have to limit your caffeine consumption for not very long, maybe just 1 to 2 weeks. You'll regain natural adenosine signaling, and soon enough, you won't be as sensitive. And this is actually due to a downregulation of adenosine receptors. Not to a pathological degree, but simply back to normal.